General Hospital spoilers reveal that the sudden, violent death of Brennan did not merely fracture Carly's heart, it ruptured the fragile illusion of control she had so carefully maintained ever since Sonny slipped away from her grasp and Jason returned. Ed as a different man. Brennan's presence had given Carly something no one else could, the sense that she was finally carving a new identity, one not defined by mob alliances or legacy expectations. His death wasn't just a loss, it was the obliteration of a future she was just beginning to believe in. Now, thrust into an emotional abyss with no warning, Carly finds herself spiraling into a psychological and strategic crisis that is both private and terrifyingly public. For a woman who has always prided herself on resilience, Carly is now exhibiting signs of complete internal combustion. Her grief is not clean or quiet. It roars through every conversation, poisons every relationship, and drives her toward increasingly reckless decisions. The very act of mourning Brennan quickly turns into an all-consuming need to find someone responsible. She doesn't believe in coincidences. Not when the world around her has long operated on secrets, betrayals, and calculated destruction. Her grief sharpens into paranoia. Was Brennan killed because of his involvement in the WSB? Was someone targeting her through him? Was Sonny involved? Was Jason? Was this about Jocelyn's connection to the agency or about Drew and his growing influence over the town? The questions fester in her mind and find no satisfying answer. Instead, they morph into a new narrative Carly begins to construct, one in which everyone has abandoned her, betrayed her, or underestimated the storm she's capable of unleashing. She starts seeing enemies where there are none, begins distancing herself from the very people trying to comfort her, and lashes out at those who dare speak Brennan's name without reverence. Portia tries to offer counsel, and Carly shuts her down. Liz attempts empathy, and Carly turns cold. Even Michael feels the walls go up as Carly, unable to trust or feel safe, begins to weaponize her pain. This isn't just grief, it's a metamorphosis. The death of Brennan has unlocked a dormant version of Carly, one who is dangerously untethered to love. One who remembers the pain of every betrayal and every moment of abandonment from her past and allows it to fuel a new mission, never to be controlled again. She begins manipulating conversations, tracking movements, eavesdropping on phone calls, questioning Joss about her ties to WSB, confronting Liesel about old affiliations, even accusing Jason of hiding things from her. Her former self might have recovered, regrouped, and moved forward with grit. But this new Carly doesn't want recovery. She wants revenge, clarity, and control. Jason, still emotionally entangled in the mystery of Britt's return, finds himself caught in the undertow of Carly's breakdown. Her grief pulls him in even as his heart yearns for Britt, whose reemergence has stirred feelings long buried. Carly senses it. She sees the shift in Jason's eyes, the distraction in his voice, and she doesn't like it. As her world collapses, she begins to cling tighter to Jason, not just as a friend, but as a possession she refuses to lose to another woman, especially one she never truly trusted. She reminds him of their history, their bond, the sacrifices he's made for her. She reminds him of the moments Britt was gone and she was the one who stood by him. It's not desperation, it's strategy born from pain. The entire town begins to shift in reaction to Carly's unraveling. Sonny watches from a distance, uncertain whether to approach or retreat, sensing that Carly is dangerously close to making moves that could endanger everyone. Anna hears whispers within WSB that Carly may be digging where she shouldn't, threatening to expose secrets that could incite another war between factions. Nina, on the fringes, sees an opportunity to reclaim some control, perhaps even to use Carly's grief against her. Though she's hesitant, knowing how grief can mutate into madness. Meanwhile, Jocelyn tries to keep peace while also confronting her own guilt about her growing role in Brennan's recruitment and how her ambitions may have indirectly placed her mother in this position of loss. And still, the specter of Brennan looms over it all. The man who was once dismissed as a short-term distraction is now the catalyst for a sweeping emotional transformation. Carly begins to dive deeper into his life, discovering encrypted messages, hidden documents, and suspicious contacts that suggest Brennan had secrets even she didn't know about. She becomes obsessed with uncovering them, not just to understand why he died, but to reclaim her sense of power. She digs into WSB files, pressures Spinelli for hacking assistance, questions Jason about Britt's disappearance and reappearance, and even considers confronting Sidwell herself, believing him to be a key player in the conspiracy that took Brennan from her. But as she chases the shadows of Brennan's past, Carly begins losing pieces of herself. Her sleep becomes restless. Her eating disappears. Her relationships deteriorate. And yet, she refuses to stop. She is convinced that understanding Brennan's death is the only way to make peace with her future. Even as others beg her to rest, to move on, to heal, Carly refuses. For her, this is war now, not just against the people who took Brennan, but against the very idea that she can be broken. This is a Carly who does not cry quietly or suffer in silence. This is a Carly who rises from grief as a weapon, hell-bent on reshaping the future of Port Charles. And whether that future includes Jason, Britt, Sonny, or anyone else is yet to be seen. Because now, with Brennan's death burning in her memory and revenge pulsing through her veins, Carly is no longer looking for love or redemption. She's looking for power, justice, and maybe even blood. And Port Charles, unprepared for the storm she has become, will never be the same. The death of Brennan was more than just the fall of a high-ranking WSB figure, it was the spark that detonated a long-buried minefield inside Carly. In the hours after the news broke, the carefully composed exterior she had built over years of loss, betrayal, and survival began to crumble. And when no one stepped in to accept blame, her grief twisted itself into something far darker, an obsession with assigning guilt, with naming a culprit who could carry the weight of her devastation. And the one person who had always been by her side, who had once promised to never let her fall, Jason, became the unwilling target of her rage. In Carly's unraveling mind, Jason could have stopped it. He could have warned Brennan more forcefully, could have intervened when the WSB power struggle became volatile. He could have prioritized her over the ghosts of his past. But he didn't. Instead, he searched for Britt. Instead, he protected a woman who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances and re-emerged as though nothing had happened. Carly's sorrow calcified into fury. It wasn't just about Brennan anymore, it was about rejection, abandonment, and the resurgence of a threat she thought had long been buried. In her eyes, Britt had stolen something from her. And now she would make her pay. What began as whispered accusations quickly became a campaign of strategic warfare. Carly started sowing doubt. First in hospital hallways where she lingered a little too long near decision-makers, then in the form of quiet requests to investigate Britt's credentials. Her activities during the time she was presumed dead, and her possible connection to off-grid WSB activity. She cloaked her campaign in concern for public safety, in loyalty to Brennan's memory. But the truth was far more personal. She wasn't just trying to destroy Britt, she was trying to punish Jason. For not choosing her. For not mourning with her. For not seeing that her world had ended the moment Brennan's heart stopped beating. Jason, at first, was slow to react. He understood Carly's grief, had seen it before, after Morgan, after Bobby. After countless losses that chipped away at her soul. But this time was different. This time, she didn't weep into his arms or seek quiet comfort. She was cold, calculating, vengeful. She interrogated him without warning, demanded to know what he'd hidden, pressed him about his encounters with Britt. When he told her the truth, that he had seen someone who looked like Britt at the airport and had reason to believe she was alive, Carly's eyes burned with a fury that chilled him. She didn't see hope in that revelation, she saw betrayal. Because to her, if Britt had been alive all along, then Jason's affections had never truly belonged to her. The weeks that followed Brennan's death were some of the darkest Port Charles had seen in years. Carly pulled strings to have Britt's medical licenses re-evaluated. She arranged anonymous calls to the press suggesting Britt was mentally unstable. She even confronted Liesel. threatening to expose her for prior WSB affiliations if she didn't distance herself from Britt. But the most disturbing shift came when she began alienating her own family. She accused Jocelyn of not being supportive, of siding with Jason, of caring more about Vaughn and WSB training than about the man who had died trying to protect her. Jocelyn, heartbroken, withdrew. Michael, caught in the middle, tried to mediate but found himself stonewalled. Carly no longer trusted anyone, not Jason, not her children, not the system. Her grief had metastasized into paranoia. Meanwhile, Jason was growing desperate. As he pursued leads on Britt's reappearance, he found himself increasingly boxed in, not by enemies, but by the people who once supported him. He discovered evidence tampered with. Witnesses who once agreed to talk suddenly went silent. An anonymous tip led him to a storage facility filled with forged documents connecting Britt to black market pharmaceuticals, a setup so blatant, so unnatural, that he knew only someone with powerful local connections could be behind it. He confronted Carly, only to be met with icy defiance. She didn't admit to the sabotage, but she didn't deny it either. She simply said, "You made your choice. Now live with it." The turning point came when Britt, unaware of the full scope of Carly's vendetta, made a public appearance to testify in a medical ethics case involving a fellow doctor. The crowd outside the courthouse was hostile. Protesters waved signs claiming she had faked her death. Someone threw a rock. Britt was visibly shaken. Jason arrived just in time to pull her into a car and drive away, but Britt's confidence was shattered. "Who would do this to me?" she asked. Jason had no answer. But in his silence, Britt saw the truth. From that moment forward, Jason became Britt's protector, not just from the public, but from Carly. And that enraged Carly even more. Her obsession turned into a vendetta. She began coordinating with Drew, whispering that Jason was losing his grip, that Britt was a danger to the city. She hinted at psychiatric evaluations, at legal filings. Liesel, realizing the extent of Carly's wrath, begged her to stop, but Carly had already crossed a line. There was no turning back. Then came the hospital gala. Britt arrived, escorted by Jason, attempting to show the community she had nothing to hide. Carly arrived moments later, dressed in black, her expression stony. The tension in the room was unbearable. Carly stood silently as Jason introduced Britt to the hospital board. And then, without warning, she stood and accused Britt of aiding and abetting Brennan's enemies, claiming she had proof of collusion with rogue WSB elements. Gasps filled the room. Jason demanded she stop. Britt froze. The damage was done. The fallout was immediate. Britt was suspended pending investigation. Jason was publicly criticized for his judgment. Carly returned home, triumphant, and utterly alone. She sat in Brennan's study, surrounded by his books, his scent, his memory. She held the photo they took just weeks before his death and whispered, "This was for you." But even Carly could feel the hollowness in her victory. Because the man she once loved, the man who once would have died for her, now looked at her with fear, not love. And the woman she tried to destroy might still rise from the ashes. Carly had won the battle, but in doing so, she had declared war on her own future. And that war was only just beginning. Jason had known there would be fallout the moment he chose to tell Carly the truth, but he had underestimated just how deep Brennan's influence had twisted into her mind, into her identity, and into her desperate need for stability in a world that had shattered too many times already. Brennan's death should have been the end of something dark, but instead, it became the spark that ignited something far worse, an emotional reckoning that neither Carly nor Jason could escape. And now, what had started as grief had morphed into obsession, delusion, and the beginning of a war between two people who once trusted each other more than anyone else. The moment Jason handed over the file detailing Brennan's secret operations, files stolen from a compromised WSB server, filled with surveillance logs, unauthorized experiments, and recruitment tactics used on young operatives including Jocelyn, Carly didn't even look. She stared through him, her expression vacant, her pain festering into something colder. Her first words were not ones of disbelief, but of calculated accusation. She claimed Jason was only trying to protect Britt, that he'd crafted this entire narrative to erase his guilt. To control the story before anyone else could. She even suggested that Brennan's death wasn't the result of a Sidwell attack or a WSB betrayal, but something orchestrated by Jason himself. In her mind, Jason had chosen Britt over her. He had let Brennan die, not to protect Port Charles, but to clear the way for Britt's return and to rewrite history in her favor. Jason didn't try to defend himself. He didn't raise his voice. He simply left the files on Carly's desk and walked away, leaving her alone with the truth she refused to read. But what neither of them realized was that the emotional fracture was just the beginning. Britt's sudden reappearance in town, shadowed by her mysterious connection to a hidden child and the reemergence of a secret operation tied to her father, had already caused enough unrest. Now, Carly had found a new target for her spiraling grief, Britt herself. If she couldn't punish Jason directly, she would dismantle the woman who had, in Carly's mind, stolen both Jason's heart and Brennan's redemption. But the storm didn't end there. Carly began digging. She contacted Liesel behind Jason's back. She demanded access to old WSB records using Jack's credentials. She even confronted Jocelyn, demanding to know what exactly Brennan had been planning with her recruitment and why Jason was trying so hard to cover it up. Joss, torn between her loyalty to Jason and her horror at what Brennan had nearly done, refused to say much. But her silence only enraged Carly further. In the shadows, Sidwell watched it all unfold. He saw Carly's descent not as weakness but as opportunity. With Brennan gone, Sidwell had planned to pull back, to recalibrate. But seeing Carly unravel gave him an idea. What if he could push her just far enough to become the chaos he needed to keep Port Charles destabilized? So he planted rumors. A forged message from Brennan's burner phone implying Jason knew more than he claimed. A manipulated photograph of Britt meeting with a man linked to Faison's old network. And when Carly found them, she fell straight into the trap. Fueled by rage, Carly confronted Britt in public, accusing her of lying, of faking her death, of manipulating Jason and playing a role in Brennan's downfall. The confrontation wasn't just explosive, it was dangerous. Security had to intervene as Carly lashed out, screaming that she would never let Britt control Jason. That she would make her pay for what happened to Brennan. The entire city watched as a woman once known for her poise and power descended into public meltdown. Her pain weaponized into something nearly unrecognizable. Jason tried to intervene, but it was too late. The damage was done. Britt, shaken and furious, refused to back down. She wasn't the same woman who'd once fled from her past. She was stronger, more guarded, and less willing to be anyone's scapegoat. She promised Jason that she would find out who was truly behind the manipulation, but not for Carly's sake, only for her own. As for Jason, he found himself caught between two women he had once loved in different ways, one still tethered to a version of him he could no longer be, and the other carrying secrets he didn't yet understand. Meanwhile, the city grew tense. Portia, Nina, and Anna began connecting dots between Brennan's death, Jocelyn's almost recruitment, and the sudden shifts in Carly's behavior. Rumors swirled in the halls of General Hospital, whispers of compromised files and WSB shadows creeping back into town. Sunny remained unusually silent, watching from a distance. Perhaps sensing that Carly's warpath might soon spiral beyond Jason and Britt and crash straight into something much darker. And Jason, once again, was left cleaning up the fallout of a truth that should have brought closure but instead fractured every fragile alliance he still had. The pressure mounted. Britt wasn't safe. Carly wasn't rational. And whatever Brennan had planned before his death, it was only a piece of a much larger network still pulsing with quiet threat beneath the surface of Port Charles. Jason knew the real war hadn't begun yet. But when it did, he'd be facing it not with the support of Carly or the safety of old loyalties, but alone, haunted by love, betrayal, And the ghost of a man who may have died, but whose legacy of destruction had just begun. Jason was no stranger to chaos, but this time, the storm was personal. Britt had returned from the shadows. Not as a victim, but as a survivor of a harrowing conspiracy that still pulsed beneath the surface of Port Charles. Her presence ignited something deep within Jason, a fierce resolve that eclipsed logic and reawakened an instinct he hadn't felt since the last time he thought he'd lost her. He would do whatever it took to protect Britt, even if it meant tearing down every fragile alliance that once tethered him to reason. And standing in his path, unwilling to be forgotten, was Carly, hurt, betrayed, and spiraling toward destruction with a vengeance as sharp as a blade. The moment Jason chose Britt's safety over Carly's grief, everything changed. Carly had expected loyalty, not love. She had expected Jason to mourn with her after Brennan's death, not to chase after a woman she believed had cost them everything. In her mind, Britt wasn't just a threat, she was the reason Jason had pulled away, the catalyst for Brennan's demise. And the wedge that would finally sever the bond Carly had spent years tightening around Jason's soul. She watched him risk everything, his safety, his freedom, his reputation, just to track Britt's trail across Eastern Europe. He didn't even hesitate. And that haunted her. Jason's pursuit wasn't random. Britt had been targeted. The same people who orchestrated Brennan's downfall were now hunting her, and Jason uncovered enough encrypted WSB data to confirm that Britt had never been truly safe, not in Port Charles. Not in exile, and not even after her staged death. Liesl had known more than she admitted. Rocco had been protecting a secret about Britt's child. And every breadcrumb led Jason deeper into a web of betrayal that reached farther than he ever imagined. For him, saving Britt wasn't just about love, it was about justice, redemption, and obliterating the system that had almost destroyed them both. But while Jason moved in silence, Carly ignited flames in public. She went to the press, feeding them pieces of truth twisted with bitterness. She accused Britt of faking her death for manipulation. She hinted at Jason being compromised, controlled, blinded by emotion. She even approached Victor's old network, desperate for leverage, anything to regain control of the narrative. She didn't care that Jason was risking his life. All she saw was betrayal. And the more he refused to abandon Britt, the more determined Carly became to bring them both down. Jason warned her. Once. Calmly. But Carly wasn't listening. She stormed into Britt's safe house in Croatia, shouting accusations, threatening exposure, demanding Jason come home and fix this. But he wouldn't. Instead, he stood between Carly and Britt. Not as a protector, but as a wall Carly could never break through again. That moment shattered something irreparable. Carly didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just turned and whispered that Jason had made his choice, and now she would make hers. What followed wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. Carly returned to Port Charles and began dismantling everything. She leaked Jason's travel records. She exposed classified WSB documents to the press. She used her connections to have security clearances revoked, closed accounts, and cut Jason off from every old alliance she could influence. Portia warned her. Michael begged her. Even Sonny tried to intervene. But Carly didn't stop. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was war. Jason, now a fugitive in the eyes of several agencies, continued to protect Britt as she unraveled the secrets of her captivity, revealing a child, a clone project, and the truth about Brennan's last mission. But even in the midst of all that darkness, Britt's greatest fear wasn't the danger. It was Jason's isolation. She saw how far he'd fallen for her. She saw the weight of everything Carly had taken. And she blamed herself. Jason didn't. He had made his choice with clarity. He had saved Britt once, and he would do it again. Over and over. Even if it meant burning every bridge back to the life he once had. Because in his mind, Britt wasn't a mistake. She was the only truth left in a world that had lied to him for far too long. And if Carly wanted to destroy everything to punish him, then let her. Jason was ready to lose it all, so long as Britt stayed alive. And so the city watched in disbelief as two of its most legendary figures turned on each other. Jason and Carly. Once bound by unwavering loyalty, now stood on opposite sides of a battlefield littered with betrayal, love, vengeance, and irreversible choices. In their war, there would be no victors, only survivors.